The France 24 debate. It's a week where we've seen airstrikes against Islamic radicals graduate from Iraq to Syria. We've also had the murder of a French tourist in Algeria, which has shocked public opinion in this country, of course. With us to talk about it is Corinne Narassiguin, spokesperson for France's ruling Socialist Party. We're also in the company of Guillaume Denoy de Saint-Marc. He's of the Europe-wide Radicalization Awareness Network. Eliamin Soum, author of Islamophobia in the Modern World, and the former head of the North Africa Bureau at the U.S. State Department, William Jordan. Now, its opponents insist that the Islamic State group is neither Islamic nor a state, but they do control vast swathes of territory. One woman went to their headquarters, the Syrian city of Raqqa. She used a hidden camera in her burqa. It's a report prepared by Haxi Myers.
A glimpse into another world. This footage has been filmed by a woman who's concealed a camera under her required niqab, risking her own safety as she walks through the streets of Raqqa. Guns are everywhere, brandished not only by militants, but also by women, like this one on her way to a children's playground. Without warning, the woman with the hidden camera is stopped in the street.
والله عن جد أنا آسفة بس يمكن هذا شفاف شوي لا تواخذني يا يبقى حلال احسع ستر والله عمرك بس ستر خلص تأمر لا تواخذنا.
Female residents of Raqqa are now forced to wear the full niqab. Men and women must attend prayer and aren't allowed to enjoy music or any other entertainment. For thousands of Syrian women, this is the new reality. But there are others who've chosen this way of life and have come from France of their own free will. In this internet cafe, women, fully covered, are speaking in perfect French.
Je ne peux pas revenir, moi je me dis que je ne veux pas qu'elle se monte dans la tête que je veux revenir parce que je ne vais pas revenir. Je n'ai pas pris le risque de venir ici pour revenir en France. Je ne reviendrai pas en France. Je n'ai pas envie de revenir parce que je suis bien ici.
Sometimes the families on the other end of these conversations cry, unable to understand the radical choice that brought their daughters here.
Je l'ai dit, ça sert à rien de pleurer ou d'avoir peur ou quoi. Ce que tu vois à la télé, c'est faux.
Some of these women came here to get married. Others arrived with their husbands. Experts say that these women play a key part in the extremists' propaganda machine. It's believed that some 150 French women are in Syria to join Islamist militants who've taken hold there.
Eliamin Soum, how do you explain that those women went to Syria from France?
It's not so easy to understand. I mean, we know that most of them are young. Some of them they try to have like a new experience, and what we saw this is like a new utopia. Like they are trying to build a new society. You know, they talk about society without drugs, without alcohols, like, and so it's not so easy to understand what is happening in their mind to go to Syria. But I think that, because if we saw these images, we know that if you go to a country very close to this new, I don't know if we can talk about a new state, about Daesh. If you go to Saudi Arabia, it's very close, the vision of the Islam they have. The Wahhabi vision, it's, you know, the women have to wear the niqab. So there is like another ideological background. And we know that most of these preachers are coming from this region, from Saudi Arabia, from the Gulf countries. And we have even to ask ourselves about their influences, you know, with now the new channels, because they have a real influence experience in some cases in the Muslim communities in the Western societies and the other societies. You know, this ideology is now we can see it in the northern of Africa, in the western of Africa. This ideology is growing. So we have to ask ourselves with how people can be fanatic, even sometimes with internet and this kind of channels like Iqra, for example.
The Saudi foreign minister recently in Paris, he got the red carpet treatment, the French trying to sell him weapons. What's being said behind the scenes, though, to Gulf states?
Well, it's we do have to work with them. It's important that they actually take part as much as possible. All the Arabic states, Muslim countries in the coalition. I think talking to Iran is also important because we need to marginalize this extremist movement, and we can't say that this is a representation of Islam, even though there are very different types of way of practicing Islam, around the world. But we have to talk to them. We have to push them towards being more and more open. We can't. If we cut off ties with them, or if we point the finger, it will certainly not make things better. And it's also important talking about the influence that these countries may have in France within the French Muslim community. It's also important that the French Muslim community also takes a stand, and I think tomorrow there's a rally organized in front of the Great Mosque. So
called for by Muslim organizations.
Absolutely, so this is important because we will need to work with them. They need to be part of the long-term solution.
Yeah, I mean, in Britain, the Muslim community's gone a step further. They've issued a fatwa against those who decide to go fight in Syria and Iraq. Should the French clerical leaders do the same?
Fatwa, not at all. We are in a secular state. We are not in the same tradition as in the UK. In France, we don't talk about communities, so that's very strange to say today that, for sure, everyone have to condemn, but as a human being, I think in the French model, there is not this idea of communities like or Muslim communities. But I think part of the leaders they condemn the majority of the people. So, but we are not in the same model, and I think it's just
not in the same model. But in France, you're right. It doesn't recognize different faiths. Yeah. It doesn't. The state doesn't. But it's a reality.
Yeah, it's at the end it's going to be a reality because we are always talking about communities. You have to condemn. We don't we don't hear Muslim people talking about this, but you have to condemn as a human being, like other crimes. But I think sometimes it just doesn't make sense to always say Muslims have to condemn. We are in the Republican country. We are not in Lebanon, which is organized as a community, but condemn as a human being, yes, for sure.
I think the Muslim doesn't show themselves as Muslims in France. They are entrepreneurs, they are workers, their identity is not being Muslim. I think, and it's difficult for the Muslim community to be pointed as representative of Muslim community because that's not the reality in France. Mm-hmm. There are people, there are citizens who has a religion which is Islam, but they don't speak up as Muslims, and that's one of the difficulties we have in France, our specificity, and it's.
But it's a problem. But it's a problem for the Muslims, is it not? The state is blind to this issue of recognizing different religions.
It's not blind.
We're hearing these dog whistle messages from the far right, which are Islamophobic.
We are a laïc country, and we don't show us as being part of a religion. It's not the way we give our identity as a French person, even if you are Muslim or Jew or Catholic. So that's one of the difficulty we have, that the Muslim community is represented by the imams. And not by the people who are Muslims and are actors in the civil society.
Yeah. And the idea of the fatwa, it's crazy. We're in a Republican country. The fatwa, it's like.
But would Muslims be on a firmer footing if there was more of a recognition of different religions?
Well, I think I think there's a misconception. It's not that the French Republic is blind to different religions. It's just that we have a very strict definition of secularism.
Right, but when you issue a census in France, you're not allowed to ask people their religion, for instance, like you do in the U.S. So.
It is true, and I think maybe for purely statistical purposes, maybe it could be a useful tool, but for our integration policies. I think it's important for all French citizens of Muslim faith right now to say that they are just outraged as any other French person, because there is this attitude from the National Front today, which unfortunately is gaining ground in France, and the National Front is actually playing in the hand of ISIS by trying to pretend that this is a clash of civilization when it is not.
All right, we saw in that report the daughter telling her mother, "Don't believe what you see on television." In part one of our discussion, we saw the mother of a UK jihadi, one of our viewers, saying she wants to know who brainwashed her son. British media must examine its role in agitating for action against Assad. Your reaction to that statement, William Jordan?
Well, I don't know if I have much of a reaction to that particular statement, but I do want to get to something that I think has been touched on here and maybe introduce the perspective of a non-French person to this discussion about the French situation, because I do think that it applies to all the countries concerned, sending, who have seen their children going into this fight. A lot of these children, this is one of the takeaways that I had from the video showing this French woman talking on Skype to her family back in France. I mean, again, I'm old enough to remember when people in the United States would turn away from their families and join cults. I mean, remember Jonestown and the people who followed that movement, ultimately to their deaths. People
Here in
who
Europe, there was leftist movements.
Leftist movements in Europe. There have been people who have maybe not gone violent, but they have eschewed everything that they stood for and everything that their families stood for because they were seeking an identity. And sometimes it took them in a bad direction, sometimes it just took them in a different direction, and they ultimately had to find a way to bring themselves to right. Now, we have a problem, and I worry about the hysteria that is grown up around this because of everything going back particularly to 9/11, 2001, and the attacks in the United States. That is sort of equating Islam with this extremism, and that everybody who's going into Syria, into Iraq, or into the zone of combat, potential zone of combat, is somehow going to come back, with a suitcase full of weapons, with a knowledge and with a determination to do harm. In most cases, I would submit that that's not going to happen. And I think that in most cases, I would submit that what these people need is some sort of reassurance that there is some other way out of this sort of mindset that they've gotten themselves in. And, the world is ultimately going to have to deal not only with these people who are going to be coming back, and we're probably not going to be ticking time bombs, but it's going to have to be dealing with the radicalized populations in the regions. Dealing with the people here, I think, is going to require accepting that they are going through a very challenging and difficult phase that has a lot to do with their own personal experiences. The religious aspect comes into play, in part, I think, by having people, perhaps not the religious establishment, but other people saying, this is not really about Islam. This is about children in a very confusing situation, coming of age and having to figure out how to deal with everything around them, and maybe making the wrong choices, but we have to offer them ways to get back on their own.
But at the end of the day, it is playing to the hand of this very small group of extremists, in that it is stigmatizing Muslims to a certain degree, and it is driving a wedge.
Oh, there's no question about it. And I'm listening to the media here in France. I pick it up all the time from the UK and from the US. I mean, again, this is all being seen, and we talked earlier before the break about how ultimately the dealing with all of this has to be handled diplomatically and politically as well as militarily. But the more that this is being dealt with militarily, the more that this is being handled on all sides. The echo chamber is being created that this is a conflict, and it is pushing people on both sides, you know, whether you're talking about the West worrying about the extremist threat, or you're talking about people who are thinking, this is an exciting situation. I want to be part of it. You know, you have an echo chamber now that is only reinforcing a lot of this, because the extreme sides are the ones that are dominating the media discussion.
All right, the extreme sides dominating the discussion. In his UN speech, Barack Obama vowing America, quote, will not base its entire foreign policy on reacting to terrorism, nor will let jihadists impose their view of the world.
The United States is not and never will be at war with Islam. Islam teaches peace. Muslims the world over aspire to live with dignity and a sense of justice. And when it comes to America and Islam, there is no us and them, there is only us, because millions of Muslim Americans are part of the fabric of our country.
This kind of discourse, should we be hearing it a lot more from Arab leaders at the United Nations?
The discourse against the clash of the civilizations, or
clash of civilizations, the clash of Sunnis versus Shias, the clash of Christians versus Muslims.
Yes, sure. But I think that the problem now with the Arabic country, you know that the borders are changing. I was talking about Libya. Now we know that in Syria, in Iraq, in Palestine, there is this very bad situation. But there is in the Oriental or in the Middle East tradition, there is a tradition of tolerance with Christian, with Jewish, with different Shias communities. So I think that we are living a very bad moment of plurality in this region. And yeah, we hope that we're going to have this kind of discourse. Yeah.
You just heard William Jordan there say that not everyone who's coming back is going to be a ticking time bomb who comes back to France.
No, but they have been brainwashed. Some of them saw or did horrible things. At least on the best thing, they would be has a post-traumatic trauma. Though they have to be treated, helped, and you have to help them not to be a threat for our community, and that's going to be tailor-made. It has to be tailor-made because every case is different. The reason why a girl or another boy or another girl went to Syria are different. It was maybe they were looking for something. They wanted to be helpful. Maybe they thought that it would be a good idea. There are all sorts of different cases, and we have to come back on which vision they had from the beginning, and retreat all the intellectual construction that has been built and partly destroyed by going to Syria.
And do you feel as though France is devoting enough attention to accompanying these people who come back?
We are working with the French government about that. There is a political willing, but now we have to do the ground work, and it means that we have to have a lot of persons taking care of all these kids who are willing to go, or the ones who came back, to treat them with all sorts of different specialists. You know, it has to be really tailor-made for every case, because some has to go to prison because they have been doing horrible things and they are dangerous. Some are not. Maybe some are not dangerous, but if you put them in prison, they can become dangerous, because the only response we have for them is to put them in prison, which may be not the good solution. So we have to have all a different catalog of measures for all these kids or young adults to bring them back into the society, and for them, maybe they're going to be radicalists, but at least if they can avoid violence, that would be fantastic.
All right, one comment coming through from Watson: the so-called good Muslims can help by sending preachers to teach these murderers good and acceptable Islam so that lives can be saved. What's your reaction to that comment, El Yamin Soon?
it's not always a question. I think it's not always a question of Islam.
Yeah, we have to understand social phenomena.
Yeah.
We always talk about religion, and I think this is not a real issue because most of them they can be radicalized, as I mentioned before, with some channel TV, with internet, and the family doesn't know. They are, when you are young,
self-indoctrinated over the internet.
Yeah, and when you are young, you are in some cases you are trying to find another way, another identity of your life. But talking about I was talking in France 24 about this. We don't have to call them jihadists. They are just used by this movement. Could you just imagine? I don't know how to call them, but they are, used as a human being by this kind of movement. Because when you go to Syria, some people, they just say, you are coming from Europe, maybe you are from the intelligence services. And I can imagine the disillusion for some of them, because, you don't have like a television, your PlayStation at home. It's something very different. So we have to understand as a psychological and a social phenomenon.
And this is a lot like, you mentioned it, Francois, this is a lot like what happened in the 1970s when thousands of European, and many, very often, well-to-do European youth disappeared into the radical underground. I mean, they just, as far as their parents were concerned, they disappeared. They didn't go to, some of them did actually go to Lebanon. They joined, liberation movements there. I mean, we all know the story of Carlos the Jackal and the merry band of people that were around him. But within Europe, I mean, you had people who literally decided that they were going to wash themselves clean of their bourgeois identity, and they were going to fight, the state, and they were going to do everything necessary, as violently as necessary, in order to achieve
much smaller numbers, though.
aim.
Actually,
I don't think it's necessarily a smaller numbers. It's just that because of the internet, the impact is greater now, and because of the means you can employ. You can be much more destructive, potentially much more destructive.
Yeah, and during the Civil War, just this point, during the Civil War of Spain, we have more than 10,000 people who went from France. And the case of Régis Debray, who went with Che Guevara to fight in Bolivia. We have in the history with this kind of movement.
Yeah, and actually, I think many of the young girls, women who are leaving France to go to these countries right now are actually from reasonably well-to-do backgrounds.
It's rebellion.
And yes, and I think it just happens that these groups right now are the best at propaganda towards these targets, these youngsters through the internet mostly.
And if you look at the religious education, there is no religious education, in fact.
Yeah, which actually sometimes explains why it's
so
easier
easy.
for them. And that this means that it definitely has to be a social solution for also for treating the problem of these youth falling into this type of extremism. There has to be a social response, and that is not religious based. That is about helping them find their own way within our society. And finding sense to making sense of their life in our own society.
Guillaume Tenoy de Saint-Marc, I'm going to read to you what a French political scientist said. He's been quoted by the French news agency. He says, "We used to dye our hair green to shock our granny. Then there was punk. Now it's the fashion to become a jihadist. The youth love a certain form of ultra-violence." But is that analysis tainted by the fact that the person who said it is, old?
I think it's not completely. It's rather true. It's just they have a cause. They're looking for a cause. They have an identity problem, and then there is a cause which is inspiring them, and they have a lot of propaganda bringing them to it.
So how do you bring them back? How do you bring them back then?
By deconstructing go from the trauma from the beginning, and it was before the religion. They had a problem with the family, problem with schools, problem with identity problem. Then they found, I've got the solution. It's jihad and it's Islam, but a fake Islam that they had been presented to them, and they move on. So we have to deconstruct all this building, and it's maybe dangerous even for them, because at the end they are completely fanatic and sure that they are on the right position. So if you deconstruct it too violently, they can be even destructive for themselves, because then everything they were thinking that was true is wrong. So it has to be done by psychologists, sociologists, social workers, It can be with the testimony of victims, testimonies of formers, but it has to be done step by step to understand exactly from what point, what was the initial intention of the person and why it went to radicalization, and then to bring him or her back to that point. But it's not easy.
And it's going to
then nobody knows exactly how to do it in Europe for the moment. We have ideas, we are testing, we are doing some projects that we are trying to do it, but we don't know if we're going on the good direction. So it's
definitely a work in progress. We're going to have to leave it there.
Yes.
But I want to thank you, Guillaume Denoy de Saint-Marc. I want to thank as well William Jordan, El Yamin Soum, and Corinne Narassigan. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Reporters.
Changing nationalities isn't always easy. Last March, people in Crimea voted overwhelmingly to join Russia. In a referendum Western powers deemed illegal. Now the rubles replaced the hryvnia, Tolstoy's knocked Kurkov off the bookshelves, and Ukrainian license plates are becoming a thing of the past. With Russification in full swing, Crimeans are torn between excitement and fear. Many are happy to surrender their Ukrainian passports, but some have other ideas.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.